Hi, Jeremy Cordeaux in the Court of Public Opinion. I'm just on air here to let you know that we'll be live streaming the Court of Public Opinion every Friday between 9 o'clock and 12 on jeremycordeaux.com. Please join us. We'd love to have you.
Did you know you can advertise on podcasts?
Don't act like you're not impressed.
Find out more at podvertise.com.au. That's podvertise with an s.com.au. Oscast. The Mental Health Show with Mark Aiston.
Kate, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, how are you going? How things, it's been so stressful for everyone over the last 6 or 7 months. How are you coping?
Look, it was up and down at the beginning. I think we were all shocked. There was a sense of this isn't real, this isn't really happening. Even though, in my training, I remember as a medical student, they said, there will be a pandemic at some point in your lifetime. And you go, okay, yeah. And, we had AIDS, of course, and we had... the swine flu was potentially going to be a major issue, and then this happened. So I think, we're all human, so we all react in, various ways, but similar in some ways. So that initial, what on earth is happening? And of course then going into worries about, will it be okay financially, and what do I need to do, and what about my family's health, etc.
Yeah, it's affected us in so many different ways, hasn't it? It's extraordinary. I mean, I don't think we had any idea it was going to. The virus itself is one thing, but just those side effects, it's been really tough. Kate, I'm really interested, obviously, which is the point of this discussion, in the book that you've written, and we'll talk about that in a second. But first of all, I just want to get a bit of perspective, and so our listeners and viewers have a feel as to the experience that you have in this area. Just in a general sense, give us some background.
Okay, so I actually started out my career as an occupational therapist, and I was very interested in mental health even then. I did my major project related to caring for people with cancer and the mental health impacts. Then I went back and did medicine, and I guess, when I left medicine, I decided to do general practice because I was mostly interested in the community level of care rather than hospital level of care. So I was in the military for a number of years back then in uniform, and then worked as a GP after I left the military and started doing a lot of training in the mental health area. And very soon, my practice became focused on mental health for men and women. And I suppose what followed was really 20 years of study and writing. I did a PhD on the area of depression, and from that came a book, and now I've written 5 books that have been published. And I do a lot of education and teaching public professionals, whatever I can do to share information around mental health.
Well, it's a wonderful thing. Mental health is not a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing what you're doing, and it's such an important area. If you don't mind me asking, is there a particular reason that you were interested in mental health?
I think a couple of reasons. One, I have always tended to be anxious, and I just thought that was normal. As a child, I thought that's what it was like. And so I sort of learnt different ways to try and cope with it as a child and teenager myself. And then, of course, when I went into my studies, I realised, I was a worrier, and I didn't like performance particularly, when you had to give talks and do things. I used to fall in a heap in exams in medicine where people were watching you. Excuse me. And when I look at the family, I think it's run in the family, and people haven't recognised it along the way. Even, I think probably my grandmother had issues around anxiety. Anyway, then I think intellectually I was very interested in medicine, in the mental health and trying to understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose, when you've got that personal experience, it drives you a bit more to try and work things out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then having a child, my son's now 28, he's a musician. We've both been, I guess, a bit perfectionistic and ambitious in our lives, and he's struggled himself with some anxiety, and particularly around performance as a musician. He in fact did his project in his music degree on performance anxiety and found that the majority of musician students struggled with it. Yeah, and he's now pursuing some studies in psychology. He's hoping to maybe do music therapy or keep going down the psychology path as well. So we share a passion from our life experience, but also just trying to understand and help people get through it.
Yeah, and it's very cathartic. I don't know whether you find it cathartic.
Yeah.
Helping other people, it's a very cathartic thing. It's not selfish. It's just the way it is. When you're helping other people or discussing issues with other people, or in your case, going to that next level and writing books and counselling people and helping them professionally. I'm sure, and I'm being presumptuous, but I'm sure you finish the end of the day. Maybe you're tired, but I'm sure that you finish very satisfied. Would I be correct in saying that?
Absolutely. And it's satisfying to see people make changes and shift in how that they feel. And sometimes it's just a small thing that they recognise or make a change with. I remember saying one gentleman who was having panic attacks, and we worked out it was very much related to some work issues and having to fly for work interstate a lot. And once he understood what was going on and had some tools to manage the feelings, really the problem was 80% sorted.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's understandable. And I guess, and just going back for a second, when you were saying that perhaps your grandmother had anxiety, way back then, the issue back then was, and even probably 25 years ago, is people didn't want to either admit it or talk about it.
No. I actually remember back in, when was it? Early 90s. No, it would have been 2000. I won an award around mental health, like a travel scholarship to go and look at what was happening overseas in the area of anxiety and depression. And I want to be careful here, but when I was presented with the award, the person said, I just don't understand what the fuss is about. Like, in my time, there were no issues. Yeah, and that's not how it was, There was reluctance to talk about it, and people self-medicated, whether that was with alcohol.
Absolutely.
My grandfather, in fact, died quite young from alcohol-related issues, and I suspect he had struggles.
Wow.
Of course, people had gone through tough times with the war, the depression, all of those things. So, of course, there was anxiety and depression. And women, took Bex, for example. That was marketed, and Coca-Cola was marketed as helping you feel better. And then, of course, there were no medications really, and the first medication that came out was one of the sedatives, and so women were prescribed these sedatives and became addicted to them. So we've had a long history, but just not understood. And there was a lot of blame. When I learnt in medical school, learnt about mental health issues, there was blame around this is due to the family and this is due to the mother, and we didn't have a good perspective on it. No, we didn't. And back in the 70s, my mum suffered depression all of her life, and back in the 70s, she was in and out of Glenside. And of course, when she was really unwell, she'd often go to the Fullerton Private. And would you believe, Kate, she'd have shock treatment. And then they'd put Mum on more Valium or Mogadon. And of course, Mum was, bless her heart, she was self-medicating.
because she was in so much pain. It's actually quite upsetting to talk about. And she'd have one or two little nips of black bottle brandy, I remember, in the mornings to get through. But of course, the combination of that and the Mogadon or the Valium meant that by 10 o'clock she appeared to be completely drunk, but she wasn't. It was just the combination. No. It was very sad, and that lack of understanding is hopefully there's a breakthrough there now. Kate, again, you've written so many books, but I want to talk about your latest one, and the reason I want to talk about this is because there are two really interesting things I find about it. One is you've written it with your son, so I want to talk about that, and two, it's about men. And so I thank you so much for helping me, and all of those men out there that have anxiety or have addictive issues or do self-medicate or have had issues in this area. So thank you. So the idea for the book, how did it start?
Well, first of all, thank you for saying that. It's very interesting because even I sent chapters off to male clients to read. I sent chapters off to male specialists to read in their field, like the chapter on substance-related issues. And they all said, thank you for doing this. And I hadn't thought about it in that way. I just saw that there was a gap. There's not really anything out there for men, in the community. There's a couple of books for professionals around men's mental health. So I was aware there was a gap. And I think I was looking because obviously, I work with men in my practice, and in the last 10 years, I've done a lot of military work again, but out of uniform this time. And I've, there are obviously females in the military. There were a lot of men that I helped in relation to mental health issues. And a lot of what we do as doctors and as mental health professionals is provide information and provide support and guide people in the best directions to get some assistance. So I thought, there's a definite need, and my son and I are actually very close. I don't have other children, and we've done a lot over the years together. We actually get on very well. And because he's so interested too, we just started talking about it. And I said to him, I think it would be good for you to come on board because you're obviously a young man and you're going to be able to make sure that what we're talking about is appropriate and hits the nail on the head in terms of the male perspective. And so, he helped research it, and he helped write segments, and he read everything that I wrote. And it was really good because he was able to say, Mum, I think it might be better to actually say it this way. Yeah. And he also raised some issues that perhaps I hadn't been able to think about because I'm not in a man's shoes.
Yeah, absolutely. And so how did he feel about being involved in it when you first spoke to him?
He was keen on the one hand, and on the other, he said, this is going to take quite a bit of time, and effort. And do I have that time and effort? But we found it. He's in Melbourne. He's still in lockdown at the moment, and it's taken 2 years to research and write, and I was actually working over in Victoria a lot. I reside in South Australia, but I was doing a lot of military work over there. So we were able to catch up in coffee shops and, flick each other chapters to read and all that sort of thing.
That's wonderful. That is wonderful. So you mentioned your relationship is a really strong one. Was that significant? Was that a really important element to writing the book together?
I think so, because it's writing it's a bit of a exploring, together and a journey. For example, there's a lot of research that goes into it. There's a lot of trying to work out what's the most important things to cover. You can't cover everything, and prioritising it, absolutely, yeah. And, you know, at one stage I took 3 weeks off work completely to write. My son came up. I was living north of Melbourne. He came up and spent a week with me. And also a friend's daughter came over and she helped with all the referencing. So, you know, we had a nice time as well. You know, we'd work hard and we'd go out to lunch and go for a walk and enjoy that together. I think he and I are similar natures in many ways, and I think because of my own experience around anxiety, I was hopefully able to help him growing up manage his own anxiety. And we've been through a bit in life with he was quite young when his grandfather died. The book is dedicated to my dad, and he unfortunately passed away in his 60s from a brain tumour. And my son has a few memories of him. You know, we went through that together and losing other grandparents, and also I'm divorced. So he was 12 when that happened. So it hasn't, you know, those things have a big impact on young ones as they grow up.
Absolutely.
So, you know, probably that's, you know, even made us closer.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask, already I can feel this really strong bond between the two of you. I mean, what does he mean to you? He must be, I'm being presumptuous again here, and maybe he must be the most important thing on the planet to you.
He is really, you know, he's amazing. And I think because of what we've gone through, we just have this, we know that if the other person needs, if you're needed, you'll be there. And that is just so important. Cate, was there anything in particular that, as a result of the research that you and Alex had done, that sort of surprised you? Probably a number of things along the way, but one thing that stood out early was how men are socialised in our society. And I thought back to my son's growing up, and when he was quite young, probably about 5, he was going to a sporting school holiday program for a couple of days, and he had in his mind he really wanted to play cricket. And on that first morning, he found out that he didn't have cricket, he had other sports. And I saw the tears come, and he was sitting in the group, and the helper next to him said, don't worry, it'll be fine, but you don't need to cry, stop crying. And I thought, it actually broke my heart a bit. Like, young boys, they're just taught to suppress all emotion. Absolutely. And that goes all the way through life. The only emotion that blokes are allowed to express is anger. Anyway, well, we may talk about that later on, but in the research, there's an author called Brené Brown, and she used to research women's issues. You've probably heard of her. And she was at an event, and a partner came up with the woman and said, why don't you research men's issues? And she said, well, that's not what I do. I research women's issues. And he said, well, I'm expected to be on the white horse, and my family would rather see me die on top of the white horse than fall off. And she was stunned, and she thought, I need to look at men's issues. And so she looked a lot into the fact that men often experience that sense of shame if there's anything going wrong or any vulnerability. 100%. And I saw that in the military a lot, amongst the soldiers, that, that was often one of the hurdles to overcome. And
it's interesting you mentioned Renee, because, she talks a lot about vulnerability and stuff like that, and that's exactly what you were talking about with your boy. He was vulnerable, he was upset, he was crying, but, we're taught not to do that. We're taught not to show our emotions. We're taught to be strong even if we're not. And, and from a personal point of view, I know that the more I suppress, the more pressure that puts on me and the more unwell I become.
That's right.
Absolutely. What's that about? I mean, we should be telling people to be as open and honest and as vulnerable as we can. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with that. And I think too, from the female perspective, we're socialised to expect men to always be strong and to not show their emotion. We want them to show their emotion, but we don't want them to show their emotion because we're socialised to expect them to be on the white horse. So we have to look at our perceptions and our socialisation, and we need to look at what's going on for men as well. And, I think the book is about the fact too that I think men are changing and they are looking to understand their emotions and to be able to express their emotions more. They are coming for help more often. Something is changing. And, I talk in the introduction about taking a, Uber ride in Melbourne one day and into town and out, and the drivers both going in and out, they both talked about important things in their lives and what was going on. And, I think it's changing slowly, but we've got a long way to go.
I read, I obviously haven't had a chance to read the whole book, but I read that was one of the areas I read. It's about us and those who are unwell or who are anxious or who suffer depression to do everything we can to change things. But it's also about other people who either live with those people or they're the brothers or the sisters of those people to also understand it more, hey?
Absolutely, yeah. So in fact, this book, I think, I hope men will read it, and I think too maybe sisters, mothers, partners, wives, they might read it too.
And we discussed that the other day. It's not just about a book that is going to assist, which is what you've just said, but it's not just about a book that's going to assist this particular male, but living with someone who is anxious or suffers depression or has addictive issues as a result of having anxiety or depression is a really, really difficult thing. It's a really difficult thing, and you would know that in your research and just through your experience. And so I think it is the perfect gift for anyone. Pick a chapter. Is there a particular chapter that you can give, that you can talk about that is I'm sure all the chapters are interesting and useful, but is there a particular chapter that perhaps you spend a bit more time on because it was particularly interesting and it was particularly enlightening to write and to do with your boy?
It's hard to pick one, really. I start out looking at things, from more of a general perspective, how we can deal with mental health related issues, and it's, there wouldn't be any man who hasn't experienced something in relation to mental health, whether it's struggling after a relationship breakdown or having issues related to substance or other addictions, etc. We're all touched by it in some way. But probably the early chapters on anxiety and depression are pretty key. Depression affects probably 1 in 6 or 1 in 8 men. And, something that you probably don't realise is that men experience postnatal anxiety and depression as well as women. And we don't see a lot about that. Probably about 10% of men will have some struggles around the birth of a child. And obviously anxiety and depression can then feed in, as you mentioned, into other areas, whether it's substance issues, and men struggle with those, 3 times as much as women, whether it's eating issues, whether it's addiction, and of course suicide is, it's just terrible how many men are dying through suicide. So in Australia, every year we have over 3,000 people suicide, and the majority of those are men.
Yeah, I mean, those figures are just staggering. And I would presume that those figures have probably not improved over the last 6 months or so.
No.
Is there a... and there are tools as well within the book. Yeah. Again, I without, I don't want to put you on the spot or anything, but is there a particular tool that you could talk a little bit about for those who might be suffering a bit of anxiety or perhaps are a little bit confused about how they're feeling? Because some people don't understand how they're feeling. They don't know what it is.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? We often get confused between feelings and thoughts. So someone might say, I feel like it wasn't fair. Okay, now that is actually a thought. I'm thinking it wasn't fair, so the feeling is disappointment.
Absolutely.
Or frustration.
Yep.
One word. So, in when there's anxiety, often we know what that feels like because everyone gets anxious at times. It's part of our wiring to help protect us. So if there's any threat, we tend to feel anxious. And men in particular often feel it as physical symptoms rather than being able to talk about the emotional side of it. They'll often, and same with depression, they'll often notice the physical side. Now, I don't know about you, Mark, but often when there's anxiety, you feel it in your chest or your abdomen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%.
I've had variations on that. Sometimes people will say, I feel it in my head or my shoulders or whatever it is. A really good tool is to, just take a moment and close your eyes and notice where the feeling is and what it's like. And we can actually often describe it a bit more like an object. So is it sort of heavy or burning or prickly or big or small? Sometimes we could even say it looks black or red. So trying to describe it and then put a bit of space around it. It's a bit like a little vacuum or a light around it. And then focus on your breathing. And when we breathe effectively, we actually breathe down to our tummy, not sort of up here. So the idea is you then breathe in and out to that anxious feeling. Yep, love it. So you take some breaths in and out, direct the breath into the feeling, and 99% of the time that feeling will shrink and dissipate. It's quite amazing. Yeah.
I love it. And those tools you can use anytime. I mean, if you're about to go for a job interview, or if you've had an argument with your partner, or if you're worried about, I don't know, Port Adelaide beating Geelong, in the first final or whatever it might be, you can use those things anytime. Cate, what is if we were chatting in 12 months, 2 years' time, or perhaps 5 years' time, if we were chatting in 5 years' time, do you feel that the area that you're in, the wonderful space that you're in where you're helping people, do you feel as though there's likely to be a major shift where the help that you're able to give, you, the collective you, will be even more significant? Do you feel as though there's an acceleration of techniques and tactics and understanding?
I think there is. I mean, certainly I've seen a lot in my career. I was trained initially in the 80s as a doctor, and as I said, some of the messages we got about mental health, I just, they weren't helpful at all. And obviously certain antidepressant, anti-anxiety medications changed completely in the late 70s, and that's helped a lot of people too. The psychological tools, they are expanding, they are changing, and the last 20 years or so we've been influenced a lot by tools that have really come from Asian countries, from Eastern philosophies, from Buddhism, a lot about mindfulness and being more present in the moment, etc. In fact, that little exercise, that tool I took you through, utilised mindfulness, about being mindful of the feeling and your breath and so on. So I think we're getting there, and I'm sure there will be major changes. Things are developing like treatments through virtual reality. So, the headsets and the virtual reality and treatments for phobias and obsessional thinking and, fears around that, all that sort of stuff is changing. So I think it will be very exciting. So I am hopeful, but a lot of the messages are, the basic, important, common sense, helping people understand, helping people tap into their own resources and preventing issues from arising in the first place.
Absolutely. Lifestyle. Absolutely, absolutely. Cate, the name of the book, when is it being published and how can people get it, please?
Okay, so 1st of November. It's published by Exile and it's called The Changing Man, a mental health guide. And you can pre-order it now from bookstores and Exile or my website. And that's drcatehowell.com.au, Kate with a C.
Just spell that, Kate.
So drcatehowell.com.au. So it will be available online and in all bookstores, and the publisher will be sending it into the UK and Europe and America and everywhere. So hopefully it will do a lot of good.
I'm sure it will. Just finally, how do you feel about finishing it?
There's always relief because it's like, writing a book like this, you have to be so mindful of having the correct information and having the right words and the right voice to share the information. So, as I said, 2 years of work, and it's like finishing a PhD, really. But it's also when it arrives, like here it is.
Oh, good. Hold that up,
Yeah, I've got my advanced copy, and it's like you just get so excited when you open the post and it's real.
Yeah.
It's lovely.
It's a wonderful thing you're doing, Kate. I'm so I'm so excited for you, and I'm so excited for for those who are interested in getting well or being well. Whether it be a male or whether it be a female who, as I said earlier, is living with someone who is struggling. I think this is going to be a really, really important resource, and what a wonderful thing you doing it with your boy. That is so unique, and it's just such a wonderful thing. Hey,
it's very special, and now that he hasn't had that experience of it arriving in the post, and now that he sees it, it's much more real for him as well. So I think he's very pleased, and I think it's also helped spur him on, to go more down that path. Music will always be his passion. He has this other passion, and I think he will, he does some teaching, and some of the students, he's got a bit of a name for being able to work with people, and a lot of the young ones that he sees to teach them music, they're being referred because they do have some learning issues or special needs, and so it's interesting how life unfolds.
Yeah, it is. It is. Kate, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you too. It's been a pleasure.
Hi, Jeremy Cordeaux in the Court of Public Opinion. I'm just on air here to let you know that we'll be live streaming the Court of Public Opinion every Friday between 9 o'clock and 12 on jeremycordeaux.com. Please join us. We'd love to have you.